Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Masks Off. I'm Kim Gross, and today I have with me as my guest, I have Dana Baker Williams, and we are going to talk about ADHD and how the brain for ADHD, oh my God, people have a different brain and how they can also put on masks and what type of masks, and how we as parents can help our teens and young adults to become more aware of the masks so that they either A, don't put them on in the first place, or B, how to remove. Ideally, we would love for our kids to never put on masks, but that's in an ideal world. Nonetheless, I will begin with a quote, and the quote is actually a quote by Dana, and she was just sharing with me that it is a quote from her book that she's working on. So we'll hold off on that for a moment, and I'll share the quote. A different brain works differently, thinks differently, and reacts totally differently. To meet them where they are, then, we have to parent differently. Oh,
yes.
Love that. Love it. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. So tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, maybe what that quote means to you since you wrote it.
Yeah, so I'm Dana Baker Williams. I'm an ADHD and anxiety coach for parents, teens, and young adults. And I got into that because of my own daughter who was struggling, and people didn't see it other than me. So all the teachers, all the school, my husband, it just kind of went unnoticed. And that was really hard for me. So when she was finally diagnosed, I didn't want it to be so hard for everybody else, because one of the things that happens is there's a lot of negativity that comes with diagnosis and the way people are, kids with anxiety or ADHD, and the masks they wear or don't wear. And in the background, the family, that family dynamic, it can get kind of not great. It's kind of explosive. There are tantrums, there's yelling from the parents because we don't know what we don't know. And that's where the quote comes from, is that our uniquely wired brains of our kids need something different than our neurotypical kids need. And so we don't communicate the same way. But if you're not taught that as a parent, you just struggle with power struggles and doing the wrong thing, and they can't hear you right, and you're not saying it right. And it's difficult, and it's lonely, and it's a hard place to be. And there weren't coaches when we were raising my daughter. And so that's how I got to be coaching, and why I'm writing the book, because the emotional part of these things actually isn't what's talked about. It's all about the organization and the academics and not sitting still. And that's all true, but it doesn't include this big emotion angle of it, because emotions start processing in the brain. And if you don't know that, you don't understand why there are these big emotions with these kids.
Okay, so I'm going to say this before we get into the conversation that we were going to talk about. I'm going to just pause for a second and say this, taking off my mask. I've had several guests on Masks Off that have talked about either their own ADHD or their kids. And I'm going to be honest, I really, really, really don't know a lot about it.
Okay.
And I know that you are on TikTok and you do such a great, the little bit that I know I've learned from you on TikTok, because you share.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, it's great because you share and articulate so beautifully.
Thank you.
How it can show up. So maybe let's start there to help me get a better grasp of, let's say that I'm a parent and I'm looking to see whether or not my child has ADHD, and not just the typical normal signs. Because I feel like you go into the nuances of how it can show up.
I think that's what's lost. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
think
if you
that's what
want to
parents
start,
don't recognize.
share that if you don't mind a little bit on
Sure.
that first.
So it can obviously show up as the kid who is running around the playground and talking during dinner and standing up and fidgeting, all of that, of course. But there's also this other side. So one is for girls who get often misdiagnosed or not diagnosed, like my daughter at first, because they're either brought up to be quiet and pay attention, even if their mind is over here. So they look
Mm,
like they're paying attention, right? So they behave properly. They work very hard. A lot of people with ADHD are perfectionists.
mm,
So, for instance, the teachers are like, "Your daughter's doing great," and I'm like, "Well, she's spending 3 or 4 hours of homework time on homework in elementary school, and she can't memorize phone numbers, and she doesn't memorize birthdays. So, no, something's wrong here."
mm,
So it's those small things. It's the big emotions. The kids who have tantrums at one of the big signs for either anxiety or ADHD can be meltdowns and tantrums at transition times. If they don't know what's happening ahead of time, or they do know and something shifts, their schedule shifts, something goes wrong, you might have a huge meltdown. There is this need to have some control, and they don't have control because it's ADHD or anxiety. So they don't have that ability to control their emotions. So all of their emotions are big.
mm.
And for anxiety, it's also things like headaches and stomach aches. And a lot of the issue is that you don't recognize it because it's also part of being a kid, right? What kid doesn't stand up and play during dinner? What kid doesn't get angry if something doesn't go their way, you know? So I think that's why I talk about the nuances, because I think when you have a classic hyperactive child or something, that's very easy to see. And I think the others are not as easy to see because there's no handbook saying, oh, and if they look just like a regular child, they might not be. They might have some other concerns. And you don't know that.
I love that we're having this conversation because, again, I go back to saying how I've had the other guests on, and I've never been diagnosed with ADHD, but a little bit after just listening, I'm like, I wonder if all that anxiety that I have felt my whole life
Mhm.
was on
Yeah.
some level ADHD and it was
Yeah.
undiagnosed.
So there's a huge overlap of kids with ADHD and anxiety. So more than 40% of kids that have ADHD have anxiety. And for a lot of people, they're misdiagnosed with one or the other because they're so overlapping.
Yeah. All right. And then you mentioned something else too, which is why I'm like, oh, I wonder if it was me, is you talked about the perfectionism. And I talk about the perfection
Yes.
mask all the time.
Yes, you do.
So,
I love that.
right. So thank you. So you said that there are all types of, or like different types of masks that kids with ADHD wear. Can you
Mhm.
share a little bit more about those masks?
Yeah, there's the behavioral, there's the social, and then there's sort of compensating. So the social mask, I would say, is, for instance, being quiet,
Mm,
looking like you are paying attention, even if your mind is completely elsewhere. If you have inattentive ADHD or you're daydreaming, you don't show that, right? So you look like you're paying attention. You sit quietly. You follow the rules. You want to do well. You want to fit in. So you look at what the kids are doing and you try to be the same as they are. So, and that's true of kids anyway. They want to fit in, right?
right.
So, how do you, but engaging in social behaviors that don't necessarily come naturally to you, maybe it's making eye contact,
Mm,
maybe it's mirroring body language, just so you don't stand out. If you have ADHD and you interrupt a lot, it's learning not to, and just kind of settling and
mm,
watching others and not joining in until you're sure that you can do it right and you're not going to stand out. There's the behavioral where you're masking by fidgeting or doing other things because you don't want to get up and run around. So you're bouncing your leg or you're bouncing up and down or you're stimming somehow with a toy or something. Stimming can also be a touch or a sound that comforts you, and you do it in a way that isn't noticeable to others, or you hope you're doing it that way. You might spend more time on masking and being appropriate than other kids who don't have ADHD or anxiety. Anxiety also makes you mask because you're nervous about everything and you don't think you're doing anything right and you don't want to stand out.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, what are the ways of, is it always you have to medicate? Is it always medication?
Not always. You totally don't have to medicate. For us, medication was life changing for
Mm.
both our family dynamic and my daughter. And as far as, so I think it's a great thing. I think if you can attack it in more than just way, right? So you look at it behaviorally and you look at it with medication and how you teach and approach that mind, because, you know, the other thing is they learn differently,
Mm.
right? So if you're a teacher and the kids aren't sitting down and behaving, but or just aren't getting something right, it can just be that they need to hear it a different way. Maybe they're hands-on learners and they need to actually practice doing something rather than just reading it or just listening to it. You know, it kind of incorporates that as well.
So, what I'm hearing is we have a lot of work to do as educators and parents
Yeah.
because, so one of the things that I shared with you and that I'm sharing with all my guests is that I'm really wanting to help parents and teachers
Hmm.
to become more aware of when children or when teens and young adults are putting on masks or wearing the masks, right? So, and perfection is one, and people pleasing is another. And there are so many other masks. And at the end of the day, the reason for putting on the mask is that the child, the person, doesn't feel safe or comfortable enough to show up in the world as his or her true self. Somewhere along the way, the child learned that if I'm going to show up as me, it's not okay. It wasn't safe because there was some caretaker in my life or some person in my life that told me over and over again that I'm not enough and I'm not worthy.
Right.
So I'm thinking about that for the norm. Now bring in a whole other level and layer of all the people out there with ADHD. And can you talk about the stigmatism, if it's that's there, and how a person with ADHD, I'm almost feeling like, and I don't know anything about ADHD, as I just said, but I'm almost feeling like it's a double whammy for these kids
It
because they
is.
are doing the normal, I can't be myself,
Yes.
I have to
And
put on a
the
mask, and now the ADHD stuff. So, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the stigma is hard. I mean, it's come a long way because we talk about mental health now and stuff. I mean, not that it's not actually mental health, it's just a
Mhm.
neurological thing. But yeah, so the stress involved on trying to be something you're not. And by the age of 12, kids with ADHD have had 20,000 more negative comments, reprimands, things like that from teachers, parents, and their peers than other children. So 20,000 more. That's a
Because why?
lot for
Because
us
they learn
because they're not doing
differently.
something right, because they learn differently, because they're not learning in the same way. So maybe they're not doing well, or maybe they're not turning in their homework because they forget, or maybe they've forgotten how to do the homework by the time they get home and they don't have something to look at because they don't take notes because their handwriting is terrible. I mean, there's just a million different reasons. And as a child, so therefore you also have the academic part, but then you've also got family, even extended family or your regular family. It's like, well, why didn't you do this? Why can't you sit down? Why can't you be more like your sister? Why can't you be more like your brother? Why aren't you paying attention? How many times do I have to tell you? Like just the everyday, right? As a parent, how many times do we say that? So it kind of comes from all angles. And then the kids, if you have a child who doesn't want to wait in line or wants to play a game and they're not included because they're slightly different and they're not masking well enough, so people have learned that they're slightly different, or they speak out of turn, or any of those things, right? So it's just coming at them every which way. And they're masking to try to fit in. They're masking to not stand out so that people aren't going to say mean things to them. They're masking so their parents don't get mad at them. They're masking so the teachers don't get mad at them. They don't get called out in front of this, class. It's like boom, boom, boom. And a lot of it's unconscious, right? So the child doesn't realize it until they get older. And then let me tell you, it's exhausting. Masking all the time, it's exhausting. These kids get home from school and they're like, I got nothing left, right? And that's also sometimes when, whether they have ADHD or not, kids come home after sitting still and behaving all day, and they kind of vomit all over their parents, right? That's the safe place. So you're my safe place, so I'm just going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
It's because they don't have anything else left to keep it together. They've kept it together all day long.
That breaks my heart.
Mm-hmm.
That really breaks my heart.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Because, okay, so then you said it's exhausting. And I know for me as an adult, and before I started doing the inner work and the transformative work, it was exhausting for me to wear a mask, to show up as a people pleaser, to be a perfectionist, to not be able to just be myself, to have relationships that were unfulfilling because I wasn't showing up as myself. And then you're saying these kids are being bombarded with messages of there's something wrong with you. You're not doing it right. Why can't you get this right? Why can't you learn this way? Why can't you be this way? Why? There's something wrong with you. You are not inherently okay the way you are.
Right. I can't tell you how many parents I get who are like, well, can you fix my child? I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. No. A, no. B, no, they don't need fixing. C, you have to adjust how you parent so that they can thrive. And so you don't have this background family dynamic that's
okay. So let's talk
messy.
about that a little bit. How can parents, so someone who's listening and says, oh my goodness, I think my child has ADHD, or my child does have ADHD, and at my wit's end, I don't know what to do. We are just like boom, boom, boom all the time. My child is, especially maybe teenage years, young adult years, because I think, do you specialize more in that age range?
I don't for the parents, because the parents really, I hope to get the ones who have the young kids,
The
because
young
then you
kids.
can get them young.
Yeah.
And you parent, once you can figure out that you can parent in a way that they can hear you better and you can connect better. And it's all about that connection, because once that connection is there, you're not getting bombarded by the negatives, right? Because you're connecting. So I hope to reach parents of the younger kids as well, so that they're set up to thrive earlier, and the family dynamic and the siblings are set up in a way that is easier as well. Because it's not easy growing up in a family if there's all the power struggles and all the yelling, or the parent is spending all their time trying to help one child and leaving the other to their own devices. So there's all that too.
A lot for sure. So let's break it down. So how would you say help the parent who has the younger child at the beginning? And then what advice would you say for the parent who has the teen or the young adult, and they have been struggling with this all along? And I'm sure you're going to say it's not too late. It's never too late for any.
It's not too late.
Right.
So it's not.
Okay. So let's start with the younger ones.
So with the younger kids, what's really important is to realize that you have to set clear communications, but they have to be concise. Because if you tell somebody to, let's start with clean up your room. Go clean up your room. How many parents have said that and then be like, you just said it was clean. What's wrong with you? Why haven't you done this? I'll tell you why they haven't done it. Because they go up to their room and it's overwhelming. They don't know where to start. So they see the whole room. So something as simple as, can you put your shoes in the closet and throw your t-shirts in a drawer? It's 1 or 2 steps. That's what they can handle. They can't handle more than that. And whether it's school, whether it's anything, breaking things down to small, manageable tasks is so helpful for them. And they can't really keep more than one or two things in their head. So multi-step instructions, for instance, like you're going to get at school, and your parents are going to give you, go, doesn't
No.
work. No. And then they forget and they freeze and they don't know, and then they're paralyzed. I have too much to do. So I do this. If I have too much to do, or I have things on my mind I know I have to do, I freeze and I don't do anything, or I do everything but that. Right. And that's anxiety or ADHD. And so the other thing with small kids that's really life-saving is building routines. Right. So very specific routines. And I'm going to give a really good tip that sounds silly, but it's really helpful. So for younger kids, if you can get them to either draw or write, depending how old they are, the steps. So let's say you want your child to get up and get ready in the morning to get ready for school, and they don't know what they're doing. In the bedroom, put a sign that says, get dressed, put on clothes, make your bed, whatever it is. And then an arrow to the bathroom. Go to the bathroom. In the bathroom, brush your hair and brush your teeth. Go to the kitchen. In the kitchen, grab some breakfast, put your book back, things like that. So here's the thing. If they can see what they're supposed to do, they don't have to be anxious about it, because they don't have to remember, because it's right there in front of them. And if it's not right there in front of them, it's not there. So out of sight is out of mind, right? Our kids have now and not now. And that's really it with ADHD. They have time blindness. So if you say be in the car in 10 minutes, you have to teach them what that 10 minutes feels like first, because they don't know. So we use timers, we use clocks, we have things we have to teach. And when they're having a meltdown, they're not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. So behavior is communication. If they are struggling and they're young and they don't have any coping mechanisms, because the control with ADHD, you don't have that control, right? So you can't control your emotions. You're 3 years behind developmentally, more or less. So that's really important to keep in mind, that it's not that they wouldn't do it if they could.
Yeah.
It's that they can't. So another thing that helps me is saying to the parents, well, if your 7-year-old can't do that, would you ask a 4-year-old to do that? Is that an expectation you'd have as a 4-year-old? And that's the aha moment. It's like, oh, crap, no. Well, then it's too much, too early. They're not ready.
Love that. Love that. And then for, say, the teen or the young adult.
Honestly, for the teens, it's still, so sometimes you don't know until they're teens, because they have masked so well and they've been able to handle the issues that come middle school or high school for real. The parents step back. They're not involved with school anymore. So suddenly they're like, my kid is failing. He was always straight A. Oh, something's wrong. Yeah, something's wrong. They've got ADHD. So then you can start all of that the same way, not putting a list in their room. But yes, but having them take notes down on their calendar, having a family calendar where you put in everything that they do, things like that to keep them on track. And, when they're angry or upset, again, hopefully they've been learning coping skills. But if you're not teaching coping skills, they haven't, right? Kids don't just grow up knowing how to calm themselves down, self-soothe, right? So being able to still acknowledge that and teach them at whatever age it is, doesn't matter. I have clients who are juniors in high school that I'm literally teaching what time feels like. Okay, you thought that was going to take you 20 minutes. It took you an hour and a half. We got to work on that. Things like that. And parents have to think, what is lagging? What is my child lagging or missing right now when they're this upset? So a teenager getting angry, pushing back, all of these things, struggling, using substances, any of those things, there's something they're not getting that they need, right? So they're lagging skill that you haven't taught them. It's a emotional need that they're not finding. Again, behavior is communication. It's all communication. You just got to kick in and think, okay, what am I missing here? What do they need? That can also help you calm yourself down, because, it's not just the kids, right? As parents, we get frustrated. We're like, oh my God, how many times do I have to tell you this? What is wrong with you?
Yes.
And those are the words that come out of your mouth because that's what you're feeling.
Yeah.
Even though you're not really thinking something is wrong with you, but that's what you're saying because you don't understand.
And what the child is hearing is something is wrong
Is
with me.
something's wrong with you.
Yeah. And then that's why they keep putting on more and more masks throughout their lives.
Or they get angrier, right?
And they
They're
get,
sick of being told that, right?
yeah.
So then there's that defiant aspect where parents are like, well, why won't they just do what I tell them to? Or why? You know, it's because they've had 12, 15 years of being wrong all the time.
Yeah.
And so they're just big holes in their self-esteem.
Mm.
You know, they just don't feel good about themselves. So then they're also that inner critic that we all get, right? Hopefully we don't get till later, but they're getting it at 12 or 10, 9, 8, 7, because they're doing everything wrong. And so they think everything they do is misbehaving. And then they get tentative and anxious because I don't know what I'm supposed to do next, brings big anxiety, which is where routines and structure come in at any age. It's like, oh, okay, it's a habit. I don't have to think about it anymore. I don't have to try to remember what the heck do I have to do next? Or what am I supposed to be doing that I'm not? Because, oops, I just realized I've been looking at this test for 20 minutes and I haven't written anything down.
This is such an important conversation, and it's not a conversation to point the finger or blame parents and to
No.
get parents to feel bad. And I want to clarify for anyone who's listening that might interpret what we're saying as they're a bad parent for doing this. This isn't where we're going with this. What we're trying to say for not only parents, but teachers, educators, is to raise awareness. We're trying to raise some awareness and get you to see
What you can't necessarily see otherwise, right? Unless you're
Yes.
told to look for
Yes.
something, you don't
Yes.
look for it. So none of it is being a bad parent, and you can change it. It's what I said in the first quote. It's a different brain thinks differently, reacts differently. We have to parent them differently if we want to stop the downward spiral. If we want to stop all that negativity that's going on in their, either for themselves, for their family, then there are ways to do that. And it's not that you're parenting wrong. You just could parent this child's brain differently and have a more successful time doing it. They will find it easier. You will find it easier. So it's just to kind of calm all of that chaos that can come from anxiety or ADHD, because they don't know what to do and parents don't know what to do, right? It doesn't come with a handbook. We don't know that we're supposed to be looking for these things. You know, we just don't.
Yeah.
Which is why I do what I do, because I didn't know. And I want to make sure that I'm here to help other parents. So it's not this lonely journal where they're all trying to figure it out as they go and scrambling. 12 weeks, it's like, okay, we can teach you how to do this. Teachers, we can teach you how to teach differently so that they can hear you. It's just a different approach.
I love that. It's such an important mission that you're on. It's so, so important. And I didn't even, well, from what I don't think I had kids that had ADHD. I don't know now. Maybe now I'm like, geez, I don't know. Maybe I did. Maybe we all did. But I know for sure that before I was introduced to conscious parenting, all I could see were my kids' behaviors, and their behaviors made me uncomfortable. They made me anxious. And I just wanted the behavior to stop. So I would just say, stop being that way, like just trying to
stop
the behavior and resist the behavior. I never knew back then to pause and think and look what's going on under the behavior.
Yes. And that's for every child, every person.
It's for
right?
every child.
Behavior is communicating. They're telling you something that they don't have the skills to tell you.
Even me now as a 54-year-old woman, if I'm heading to the refrigerator or the pantry mindlessly looking to shove food in my mouth, that's a behavior, right? But there's a reason that I'm saying.
Other than that, other than hunger, sometimes it
Right?
is hunger, and that's okay.
Yes. Yes, exactly, exactly. Sometimes it is. A lot of times it's not. It's like, I just want to numb my feelings or whatever.
Yeah,
What we're trying to say, I think, you and I, as we kind of bring this to a close, and I think it's the biggest takeaway for me anyway, and I think it would be for people listening, is that when you're seeing these behaviors, when you see an unwanted, in your opinion, like, in your mind, an unwanted behavior from your child, teenager, or young adult, because my 21-year-old
absolutely.
still does it, my 23-year-old, and like I said, just even me, to look at the behavior as being a warning sign. Just like when there's
Signal.
going to
Yeah.
be a tornado, you hear the sirens, right? Tornadoes coming.
Yes. I used to tell one of my clients, step away from the stove, and the stove was her teenage daughter. It's like, you
Yes.
don't have to engage. Step away. Take your pause. Don't engage. You don't always have to engage.
And that's key too.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very important point, is that, okay, so the awareness part and looking at the behavior and looking at what's underneath is very important. But I think there's a step even before that. There was a step before for me, because I would see the behavior and I would get activated by my
Right.
child's behavior. I needed to take the time to go and do something for myself. I needed to go breathe. I had to pause. I had
You have to
to,
pause. You have to
right?
pause. Take
Pause.
that pause.
Take the pause. What does my inner child need? Why am I being activated in this moment? What is this bringing up for me? What mirror are they showing for me? And yes, this takes time, and yes, it takes work, but the connection, like you said, the
It's huge.
connection is huge, because then I come back to my young adult children in a different way. Now I'm more open-hearted. I'm open-minded. I'm curious. Hey,
Yes.
what's
Best.
going on? Right? I see that you are doing this. I see that you said that. I see that you look blah, blah, blah. What's going on? Do you want to share? I'm here to listen and support you.
And that's so key. Listening, the active listening, and listen to understand as opposed to listen to reply. Right? Take that beat to listen to them more than talk less, listen more. If you got a teenager, talk less, listen more.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Okay, so well, that's huge. So I think we just nailed it. We just solved the whole entire problem. But if there was anything else, if you said, Kim, like, that was a great conversation, we raised so much awareness, we're giving parents so many tips and things to think about. But there's one more thing. Is there anything left unsaid that you could think that really needs to be said?
I think if you can keep the connection, the relationship with your child first in your head, if that's the first thing you go to when you're looking at whether it's misbehavior, good behavior, them going to their bedroom and shutting the door, which they're going to do, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Put them first in the equation, the relationship first. And that just might let you lead with compassion, lead with love, lead with that intention to connect, because that is the basis for trust. And once you have trust, which is a two-way street with kids and teens, that's everything. It's everything.
Beautiful. So beautiful. I just love this conversation so much. So, how can people find you if they wanted to find you? If they're listening to this episode and they really want to reach out to you because they need some help or some advice, how can they find you?
My website is parentinginreallife.org, all one word. And so go there. You can book a time to talk with me for free. There's a blog there, so it goes into some of this. There's a lot of writings I've done. There is the first chapter of a book I'm writing. You can sign up for if you want to. Any of those things. Reach out, because I love to connect. with people, and I'm here. The reason I'm here is to help. So let me do that.
Mm. I love that. I love that. And like I said, you also give so much value on TikTok as well. You
I
are
am
there
also on
giving.
TikTok and
Yeah.
Instagram. It's true. I started TikTok because I hate doing video. I hate being the center of attention. Nobody knows me there.
Yeah.
And now I
But
do it a lot.
you do it a lot, but you're very articulate in
Thank you.
identifying how it looks on kids and what to do when you see it. And very
Thank you.
small, you're welcome, very small, succinct, tangible tips is what I feel you give on TikTok.
And that's what works with kids and parents, right?
Yes.
Small and nutty.
Yes. So good. Well, thank you again so much
Thank you.
for being a guest today. You're welcome. So thank you everybody for tuning in to another episode of Masks Off. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you found value in what you heard today, I would certainly love if you could like, comment, or subscribe. And I will see you next week on Masks Off.